My name is Mary Whitmore and I have been a housekeeper for most of my life. Some people might look at a woman like me and see nothing more than an old maid polishing floors, setting tables and fussing over linens. But I will tell you this. Walls remember the footsteps of those who live within them, and a housekeeper hears more confessions in silence than most priests do in church. And that's why I must tell this story. Because I lived inside a house that had been broken, and I watched a man with a brilliant soul shrink into the shadows of his own despair. The mansion where I worked was once a beacon of laughter, ambition, and promise. Nathaniel Grant, my employer, my charge, my almost son, was the kind of man who should have been admired by all. He was young when I first began working for his family, barely out of school, but even then his mind was like a blazing torch. Business ideas rolled off his tongue like verses from a hymn. Everyone said he would take the tech world by storm. And for a while he did. Until she came. Her name is not one I care to speak yet. All I'll say is this. She wore beauty like armor and charm like a sharpened blade. She was the kind of woman who could make a room fall silent just by stepping inside. And Nathaniel, well, he was still young enough to believe that beauty meant honesty and charm meant love. When their story ended, and oh how it ended, the man I cared for was no longer the same. I remember the first day of his silence. The newspapers were spread across the kitchen counter like battlefield maps. Tech heir betrayed. Grant legacy crumbles amid scandal. Love affair ends in ruin. The photographs showed him with hollow eyes and her with her painted smile, her hand resting lightly on another man's arm. The world feasted on his downfall. But inside the mansion there was nothing but silence. For weeks Nathaniel spoke barely a word. He locked himself in his study, his meals untouched, his phone unanswered. I would knock gently on the door each morning, tray in hand, only to hear the rustle of papers and then nothing. The once vibrant garden grew wild, weeds swallowing roses. Dust gathered on windowsills where once the sun shone through crystal-clear glass. I kept cleaning, kept cooking. I kept waiting. And in the quiet hours I prayed. I prayed that one day he would look up from his despair and see me, not as a servant, not as a woman bound to duty, but as someone who loved him enough to stay when the world turned its back. 2 years passed like that. 2 years of half-eaten dinners, unopened invitations, and a house that echoed with loneliness. Then one morning something changed. I was scrubbing the marble in the foyer when the heavy front doors opened, and a burst of laughter rolled in with the autumn wind. Nathaniel stood there, his posture straighter than I had seen in years, and beside him was a woman. She was radiant, hair like firelit gold, eyes the color of the ocean, and a smile so confident it seemed rehearsed. She wore a coat that must have cost more than my yearly wages, and her perfume filled the entire hall like a spell. "Mary," Nathaniel said, his voice almost unfamiliar in its brightness. "This is Clarissa." She extended her hand to me, her manicured nails glinting under the chandelier. "I've heard so much about you." Her grip was soft, too soft, the kind of handshake that belonged to someone who had never lifted anything heavier than a champagne glass. But I smiled politely and welcomed her inside. For the first time in years the mansion seemed alive. Nathaniel began opening the drapes again, dining in the grand hall, even playing the piano on evenings when Clarissa requested a song. Laughter filled the rooms, replacing the haunting silence. But behind my smile, unease settled into my bones. Because while Clarissa's laughter was sweet, her eyes were never soft. They were calculating, searching, measuring. And I, Mary Whitmore, had lived long enough to know when a woman was hunting for something that wasn't love. I kept my suspicions locked inside my chest, carrying them like a weight no one else could see. After all, who was I to question the woman who seemed to have resurrected Nathaniel's spirit? Who was I, an old housekeeper, to tarnish the first happiness he had tasted in years? But the mansion itself began whispering warnings to me. Late at night, I'd hear her voice echoing down the hall in hushed tones, speaking on the phone when she thought everyone was asleep. Some mornings I'd find papers on Nathaniel's desk, documents she had asked him to sign, proposals for investments that seemed to benefit her more than him. And then there were the little things, like how she discouraged his visits to his mother's grave, calling them a waste of energy. Or how she rolled her eyes when I brought Nathaniel his tea, as if my loyalty were an inconvenience. So I said nothing. Until one night I heard something that froze me to the core. I was walking past the library, a tray of tea in my hands, when I heard Clarissa's voice through the half-open door. She was laughing, but not the kind of laugh that warms a room. It was sharp, cruel. "Yes, Jason," she whispered into her phone. "Everything is going exactly as planned." I froze, my breath caught in my throat. She continued, her words quick and venomous. "Don't worry. He trusts me completely. Within weeks I'll have access to the safe. And once he proposes, we'll have him wrapped so tightly he won't know where to turn. Just be patient. The money is ours." My hands trembled so violently that the teacups rattled against the tray. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding louder than the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. When I reached the kitchen, I set the tray down and gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. A safe. A proposal. This wasn't love. This was a trap. For the rest of the night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my small attic room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm outside. Memories of Nathaniel's first betrayal flooded back. The headlines, the humiliation, the silence that followed. I had promised myself I would never let him suffer like that again. But what could I do? If I told him, he might not believe me. He might think I was jealous of the woman who had finally brought light into his life. And if I stayed silent, he would walk willingly into Clarissa's snare. The storm outside raged on, rain lashing against the windows, thunder shaking the very walls of the mansion. And in that storm I realized something terrifying. The silence that had once protected Nathaniel was now the very thing that would destroy him. I would have to choose. Stay silent and watch him fall again. Or speak and risk losing him forever. That was the night everything changed. Because in the shadows of that storm, I understood that the mansion was not just silent anymore. It was warning me. And I, Mary Whitmore, could no longer ignore its cries. The morning after that storm, I carried on with my duties as if nothing had happened. That's the curse and blessing of being a housekeeper. You learn to hide your feelings behind polished silver and spotless floors. But beneath my steady hands, my mind was burning. Clarissa's voice still echoed in my ears. "The money is ours. He trusts me completely." And that name, Jason, slithered through my thoughts like a snake. I wanted to shake Nathaniel awake, shout the truth at him, but when I saw him at breakfast, my courage crumbled. He looked younger than I had seen him in years, smiling faintly as Clarissa poured his coffee and smoothed his tie. He glanced at her the way a drowning man might look at the hand that pulled him from the water. How could I take that away from him? The mansion felt different now. Not lighter but watchful, as though its walls were holding secrets I had yet to uncover. I began to notice Clarissa's patterns. She made phone calls late at night, pacing in the guest bathroom down the hall from Nathaniel's study. I often heard the low murmur of her voice when I walked past, though she always emerged with a smile, pretending she'd just been reapplying lipstick. One evening, after serving dinner, I lingered near the library door while they talked inside. "I think you should bring Mary in less," Clarissa said sweetly, though there was a steel edge to her words. "She hovers. It's distracting." Nathaniel chuckled. "Mary's been with me my whole life. She's family." Clarissa's voice softened, but her tone was like honey masking poison. "I know, darling. But sometimes family holds us back without even realizing it." I stiffened, pressing my back against the wall. He was trying to erase me one whisper at a time. The truth revealed itself by accident. It was late, close to midnight, and the house was quiet except for the ticking clock in the hallway. I had gone upstairs to check the windows when I noticed something odd. A small tile in Clarissa's bathroom wall sat slightly crooked as though it had been moved. Curiosity is dangerous, but I couldn't resist. My fingers pried at the edge until the tile lifted free. Behind it was a narrow cavity, and inside, wrapped in a silk scarf, was a burner phone. My heart thundered as I held it in my hands. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up and immediately messages appeared. "Jason, everything is ready. He'll propose soon. Clarissa, perfect. Once I have access to the safe, we'll have leverage. The fake pregnancy should seal it. Jason, don't forget the housekeeper. He could ruin everything. Clarissa, I'll deal with her." My knees nearly gave way. I scrolled further, each message worse than the last. Plans of blackmail. Discussions of bank accounts. Even instructions for manipulating Nathaniel's fragile trust. I covered my mouth with my hand, fighting back a sob. She wasn't just a gold digger. She was a predator. And I was prey just as much as Nathaniel was. I snapped photos of the messages with my old phone. My hands shook so badly that half the images came out blurred, but enough was clear to prove the truth. As I returned the burner to its hiding place, footsteps echoed in the hall. My blood froze. The door creaked open. "Mary." Nathaniel's voice was groggy, confused. He stood in the doorway wearing his robe, rubbing his eyes. "What are you doing in here?" I swallowed hard, clutching the tray I'd brought as cover. I thought Clarissa might need fresh towels," I stammered. "I didn't mean to wake you." He frowned slightly but nodded. "All right. Try to rest, Mary. You work too hard." He turned back toward his room, never noticing the sweat on my brow or the tremor in my voice. But Clarissa, she wasn't behind him. She was watching from the end of the hallway, her silhouette framed by the moonlight streaming through the tall windows. Our eyes met, and for the briefest moment her perfect smile slipped. It was then I knew she suspected me. The next morning I resolved to tell Nathaniel everything. I couldn't wait any longer. The risk was too great. I found him in the study going through business reports. His face brightened when I entered. "Mary," said, "I was just thinking of you." I hesitated before speaking, my voice shaking. "Nathaniel, I've discovered something about Clarissa." His expression hardened instantly. "What about her?" I pulled out my phone, showing him the photos. "She's been conspiring with someone named Jason. They plan to..." Before I could finish, he cut me off. His jaw tightened and his eyes narrowed. "Clarissa told me this might happen." My breath caught. "What do you mean?" "She said you would try to turn me against her. That you've grown possessive. Jealous even." Tears stung my eyes. "Jealous? Nathaniel, I've been with you since you were a boy. I've given my life to this house, to you. Why would I lie?" He shook his head, pushing the phone back into my hands. "You've always protected me, Mary. But you can't protect me from happiness. Clarissa makes me feel alive again. Can't you just be glad for me?" The weight of his words crushed me. He didn't believe me. And worse, he believed her. That evening, Clarissa cornered me in the kitchen. Her smile was as radiant as ever, but her eyes burned with quiet fury. "You went snooping," she whispered, her voice like velvet over steel. "You shouldn't have done that." I stood my ground. "I know what you're doing. And one day so will he." She leaned closer, her perfume suffocating. "By then it'll be too late." Her laughter trailed after her as she walked away, leaving me trembling. 4 days I lived under the weight of Nathaniel's doubt and Clarissa's threat. Every time I tried to approach him, she was there, always by his side, whispering in his ear, weaving her spell tighter and tighter. But fate has a way of forcing truth into the open. One night, Nathaniel invited me to join them for dinner. I sat quietly at the edge of the table, my appetite gone, as Clarissa sparkled with stories and laughter. Nathaniel looked at her with such devotion that it broke me. Halfway through the meal, he stood and reached into his jacket pocket. My breath caught when I saw the small velvet box in his hand. Clarissa's eyes gleamed. But before he could kneel, the box slipped, falling onto the floor. As Nathaniel bent to retrieve it, something else fell from his pocket. The burner phone. It clattered across the polished wood. Silence filled the room. Clarissa froze. Her face drained of color. Nathaniel frowned, picking it up. "What's this?" For once she had no rehearsed smile. No clever excuse. Only fear flashing in her perfect eyes. And in that instant I knew, her mask was about to crack. The room was frozen in silence. Only the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway broke the stillness. Nathaniel held the burner phone in his hand, turning it over with a frown. "Whose is this?" he asked quietly, his voice more confused than angry. Clarissa's lips parted, but no words came out. Her eyes darted to me, sharp, accusing, as though I had somehow conjured the device out of thin air. "It's yours, isn't it?" Nathaniel pressed. Her perfect composure cracked for a split second, just long enough for me to see the fear behind her mask. Then just as quickly she laughed, a high, tinkling laugh that echoed unnaturally against the walls. "Oh, darling, don't tell me you're suspicious already. It's just a spare phone I use when I travel. I didn't think it mattered." Her voice was light, almost playful, but her hand trembled as she reached for the phone. Nathaniel pulled it back. "Why didn't you tell me about it?" I sat frozen at the table, my hands clenched so tightly in my lap that my nails dug into my skin. This was the moment the truth could break free or be smothered again beneath her lies. Clarissa's eyes softened and tears welled at the corners. She reached for his arm, her voice trembling. I was afraid, Nathaniel. Afraid you wouldn't trust me. I've been talking to Jason, my cousin, about private family matters. He's the only family I have left, and I didn't want to burden you with it. Cousin. The audacity of her lie nearly made me choke. Nathaniel's brow furrowed, suspicion flickering in his eyes. But Clarissa leaned in closer, her voice breaking as tears slid down her flawless cheeks. I didn't want you to think I was hiding anything from you. I love you too much for that. She clung to him, her sobs muffled against his chest. And for a moment, he believed her. Nathaniel, I said firmly, my voice cutting through the scene. Check the messages. Don't just take her word. Clarissa's head whipped toward me, her tears gone in an instant. Her eyes blazed with fury, though Nathaniel couldn't see it. How dare you, she hissed. You've hated me since the moment we met. You can't stand that I've given him what you never could, happiness. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor. I don't hate you, Clarissa. I hate what you're doing to him. He deserves love, not manipulation. Show him the messages. If you're telling the truth, prove it. Her lips curled in a cold smile. You always did overstep your place. Nathaniel's hands shook as he unlocked the phone. For a long moment he scrolled in silence, his face growing paler with each line he read. Jason, everything is ready. He'll propose tonight. Clarissa, perfect. Once I have access to the safe, we'll have what we need for blackmail. His breathing quickened. Clarissa, what is this? She lunged forward, trying to snatch the phone. Those aren't mine. They're fabricated. She planted them. Her finger jabbed at me like a dagger. Nathaniel turned slowly, his amber eyes locking on mine. And in them I saw the question that would define everything. Did you betray me too? I shook my head, tears spilling down my cheeks. I've served you your entire life. Why would I betray you now? Nathaniel, I found that phone hidden in her bathroom wall. I've been trying to protect you. His jaw clenched. He looked back at Clarissa. Tell me the truth. For the first time the mask shattered. Her voice dropped, sharp and venomous. Fine. You want the truth? You were a fool the first time and you're a fool again. Did you really think someone like me wanted you for you? Look at yourself. Pathetic, broken, hiding behind your fortune like a scared little boy. Nathaniel flinched as though she'd struck him. Clarissa's beauty twisted into something cruel. I could have had everything. The house, the money, the name. And you would have given it all to me with that stupid ring. He kicked the velvet box across the floor. But thanks to your meddling little maid, you'll die alone instead. Her words cut deeper than any blade. Nathaniel's voice, when it came, was raw but steady. Get out. Clarissa blinked, stunned. What? I said, get out of my house. She laughed bitterly. You'll regret this. Nobody rejects Clarissa Dane. Her heels clicked furiously against the marble as she stormed out, the slam of the front door echoing through the halls like a final threat. For a long time, silence reigned again. Nathaniel collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook, though he made no sound. I approached quietly, resting a trembling hand on his shoulder. I'm sorry, I whispered. He lifted his head, his eyes red but clear. No, Mary. I'm sorry. I doubted you. After everything you've done for me, I doubted you. I squeezed his hand gently. You were blinded by hope. There's no shame in that. But in my heart, I knew the battle was not over. Clarissa wasn't the kind of woman who slinked away quietly. She had venom in her blood, and venom demands to be spent. The days that followed were uneasy. Nathaniel tried to bury himself in work, but the mansion hummed with tension. Reporters began circling the gates again, sensing a scandal. I caught glimpses of Clarissa's name in online tabloids, socialites spurned. Secret love affair exposed. And then came the letter. A thick envelope arrived at the mansion, addressed to Nathaniel in an elegant script. Inside was a legal notice. Clarissa was suing him for breach of promise, claiming emotional damages and financial dependency. My stomach turned as Nathaniel read it aloud. She's trying to twist my kindness into contracts, he muttered, his hands shaking. I met his gaze steadily. Then we fight her with the truth. But Clarissa wasn't finished with me either. One evening as I left the market with a bag of groceries, a sleek black car pulled up beside me. The tinted window rolled down and there she was, perfect, smiling as if nothing had happened. "Mary," she purred, her voice silky. "Still playing the loyal servant?" I stood frozen, clutching the bag to my chest. Her smile widened, but her eyes were ice. "Enjoy your little victory while you can. Because when I'm finished, Nathaniel won't just lose everything. He'll lose you too." The car sped away, leaving me trembling on the sidewalk. I knew then that the war had only just begun. The woman in the mask was gone. What remained was far more dangerous. Clarissa Dane with nothing left to lose. And the question that haunted me was this: could I protect Nathaniel a second time, or would her venom finally destroy us both? I will never forget the night Clarissa's mask finally shattered. It began at the dinner table, the same polished mahogany where Nathaniel had once courted her with soft laughter and lingering glances. But this evening his eyes were steel and his lips pressed into a hard line. "Who is Jason?" he asked, his voice cutting through the candlelit air. Clarissa's hand froze midway to her glass of wine. The ruby liquid trembled, catching the glow of the chandelier. For a moment her face was a perfect canvas of innocence. Wide eyes, parted lips, confusion as flawless as any actress on a stage. "Jason?" she repeated, her tone laced with disbelief. "Nathaniel, I don't know what you mean. But I saw it, the flicker quick as a lightning strike in her gaze. Panic." Nathaniel leaned forward, his knuckles white against the table. "Don't play games with me. I heard you. I know you've been speaking with someone, plotting behind my back." Her expression melted into wounded shock. "Plotting? With you? After everything I've given? After I've brought joy back into this mausoleum of a house?" Her voice cracked, soft and fragile, the performance of a lifetime. But Nathaniel didn't falter. His eyes, though pained, were clear. And in that moment I think he finally saw what I had seen from the beginning. "You're lying," he said simply. Something in her snapped. The sweetness drained from her like wine spilled across linen. Her lips twisted, her eyes sharpened, and the fragile mask fell away to reveal the woman beneath. "Fine," she hissed, slamming her glass onto the table so hard it cracked at the stem. "Yes. My partner. The one who doesn't wallow in self-pity all day. The one who actually has a plan for the future." Nathaniel recoiled as if struck. "You used me," he whispered. Her laugh was bitter, sharp as broken glass. "Used you? Nathaniel, please. You think anyone actually wants you anymore? The disgraced publisher? The man whose wife abandoned him? You're a shell. A weak, desperate shell. I gave you purpose. I made you feel alive again. And in return I was supposed to get what I deserve." The words echoed in the dining hall, cruel and unrelenting. Nathaniel's hand trembled against the table. I wanted to rush to his side to shield him from her venom, but something rooted me in place. Perhaps it was the terrible clarity of truth, how naked and merciless it stood between them. "Get out," Nathaniel said, his voice low. Clarissa's eyes narrowed. "You don't get to tell me to leave. Not after all the promises." "I promised you nothing," he replied. "Oh, but that's not how the world will see it." Her lips curved into a predator's smile. "Do you know how easily I can ruin you? A story in the papers. Wealthy recluse seduces young woman, then discards her. They'll eat it up. Findle. Headlines. You'll never recover." His face crumpled with pain, but his words were firm. "I've already survived worse." Her fury ignited then, a blaze I had only glimpsed in her eyes before. She swept the wineglass from the table, shattering it against the wall. "Nobody rejects Clarissa Dane," she screamed, her voice cracking with rage. "Nobody." The chandelier trembled in the silence that followed. Nathaniel rose slowly, his shoulders straight despite the weight of betrayal pressing down on him. "You need to leave. Now." And for the first time I saw Clarissa falter. Perhaps she had believed her beauty and her rage were enough to keep him under her control. But the man standing before her now was not the broken recluse she had first ensnared. He was wounded, yes, but he was no longer blind. With a final glare that could have burned through stone, she swept out of the dining hall. Her heels struck the marble like hammers of judgment until the echo of her departure faded into silence. I exhaled, realizing I had been holding my breath. Nathaniel sank into his chair, his hands covering his face. "Mary," he whispered, "what have I done?" I stepped forward, placing a trembling hand on his shoulder. "You've seen the truth," I said softly. "That is enough." But it was not the end. Days later the first letter arrived. Legal papers, stamped and formal, accusing Nathaniel of emotional damages, broken promises and financial obligations he had never made. Clarissa's name inked boldly across the top, her lies woven into paragraphs of venom. She claimed he had courted her with intentions of marriage, that he had promised her wealth and stability, that she had sacrificed opportunities for his sake. It was absurd, but in the eyes of the law, absurdity could still wound. Nathaniel's hands shook as he read. "She's trying to destroy me." "Yes," I said, steadying him as best I could. "But this time you're not alone." I still had the photos, the ones I had taken months before when I discovered her secret phone. Messages to Jason. Discussions of their plan. Proof that her affection was nothing but manipulation. When Nathaniel's lawyer laid eyes on them, he nearly wept with relief. "This is it," he said. "This destroys her case." The weeks that followed were a blur of hearings and headlines. Clarissa arrived in court dressed like a victim, pearls around her neck, eyes glistening with fabricated tears. She spoke of abandonment, of false hope, of the cruelty of a man who lured her in only to discard her. And then came the evidence. The photographs. The words she had thought hidden. "Soon he'll sign everything. He's a fool." The courtroom gasped. Even the judge's eyes hardened. Clarissa's tears dried in an instant, her mask crumbling under the weight of truth. The case was dismissed. Her name, once whispered with admiration, now dripped with scandal. She stormed from the courtroom like a storm cloud, her threats echoing in my ears. "You'll regret this, both of you," she spat, her voice venomous. "This isn't over." But in my heart I knew it was. For the first time in years, Nathaniel walked out of that courthouse with his head held high. And though his heart bore scars deeper than any I could see, there was something new in his stride. Freedom. It was a week later when I found myself at a small cafe downtown, seeking a quiet moment away from the mansion's lingering shadows. I was stirring sugar into my tea when the sound of hurried footsteps approached. "Excuse me, miss." I looked up and froze. A swarm of reporters surrounded my table, cameras flashing, microphones thrust toward me. One of them leaned closer, his voice urgent over the clamor. "Mary Holloway," he said, breathless, "you've been at Nathaniel Crowe's side for decades. Tell us, how did you save him?" The cafe spun around me, a storm of questions, flashing lights and curious eyes. And I knew in that instant that my silence was no longer mine to keep. The cameras had long since faded, but the question lingered, echoing louder than the clatter of teacups in that cafe, louder than the headlines that spread across the city in the weeks that followed. "How did you save him?" For days I avoided the answer. Not because I didn't know it, but because the truth itself frightened me. I had lived so many years in silence, convincing myself that silence was loyalty, that silence was protection. Yet in the end, silence had nearly destroyed the very man I had devoted my life to serving. It was the truth, messy, painful and undeniable, that saved Nathaniel Crowe. And if I am honest, it saved me too. Nathaniel was never the same after Clarissa. How could he be? Trust, once shattered, does not piece itself back together overnight. But I began to notice small changes in him. He rose earlier, not to drown his hours in whiskey but to walk through the garden, pruning the roses himself. He reopened the library doors, brushing dust from the shelves, sometimes even reading aloud passages as if reacquainting himself with the words he once loved. One morning I found him at his desk, not staring blankly as before but writing. His pen moved with hesitant strokes, a man relearning the rhythm of creation. "They're just letters," he said when he caught me watching. "To old friends, to people I wronged, to myself perhaps." But I knew it was more than letters. It was life returning word by word into his weary soul. I cooked, I cleaned, I kept the fires lit. But now when he passed me in the hall, he would pause, place a hand on my shoulder and say softly, "Thank you, Mary." 2 words. Simple, small. Yet after decades of invisibility, they warmed me like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. It was during this season of quiet rebuilding that Edward arrived. Edward Whitcomb, a retired professor of history, gray-haired but spry, with eyes that carried the kind of laughter that lingers long after the joke is told. He had once been a colleague of Nathaniel's in publishing, and he came one afternoon bearing a box of old manuscripts Nathaniel had helped print. I remember answering the door. His smile was immediate, warm. Good afternoon. You must be Mary. I blinked, surprised. You know my name? Of course, he chuckled. Nathaniel speaks of you as the foundation of this house. I felt my cheeks flush in a way I hadn't in years. Edward became a regular visitor, staying for tea, sometimes lingering to share stories of travels, of old books, of his students who had become authors themselves. He treated me not as a servant but as a companion, asking my thoughts, listening with genuine interest when I spoke of recipes, of seasons, of the little wisdoms one gathers in a lifetime of watching. And slowly I realized something startling. While I had spent decades saving Nathaniel, I had nearly forgotten that I too was someone worth saving. Nathaniel noticed the change. One evening as we cleared the dining table he smiled knowingly. You should let him take you to the museum, Mary. I paused, startled. I beg your pardon? Edward, he said, smirking faintly. He's waiting for you to say yes. I fumbled with the silverware, my heart fluttering like a girl's. Well, I don't know that. Mary, Nathaniel interrupted gently, you've given me your loyalty, your silence, your truth. It's time you give yourself something too. His words settled into me like seeds. And slowly they began to bloom. In the months that followed, Nathaniel and I walked parallel paths of healing. He mended bridges, attended lectures again, even considered publishing a collection of memoirs. I, meanwhile, allowed Edward's presence to brighten corners of my life I had long abandoned. We visited art galleries, strolled through the park, read poetry aloud over cups of tea. And though I remained Nathaniel's housekeeper, I began for the first time in my life to feel like more than just that. I felt seen. And so, when people ask me how I saved him, here is the truth. I did not save Nathaniel Crowe by silence. Silence only fed his shadows, allowed liars like Clarissa to weave their webs unchallenged. I saved him by breaking that silence. By speaking the truth even when it hurt, even when he doubted me, even when it risked my place at his side. It was truth, ugly, undeniable truth, that shattered Clarissa's mask. Truth that set Nathaniel free from her grip. And perhaps most of all, truth that reminded me of my own worth. I am not the heroine of novels, nor the beauty of ballrooms. I am Mary Holloway, a housekeeper who stitched silence into her days until silence nearly consumed her. But I have learned this. Sometimes saving another is the only way we learn to save ourselves. And sometimes the most powerful act of love is to speak what others would rather keep hidden. So if you are listening to my story now, remember this. Silence protects liars. But truth saves lives. If my story touched you, if you've ever carried silence when you should have spoken, then let my journey remind you, your voice matters. Don't let lies fester in the dark. Share this story, subscribe to Nana's Hidden Stories, and carry this truth with you. Silence protects liars, but truth saves lives.